Have you ever been just sitting on your couch at like 11 p.m. on a random Tuesday listening to some classic rock playlist, and suddenly you get this just overwhelming, almost irrational urge to pick up an electric guitar and start shredding?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, it is a incredibly common impulse. The allure of the electric guitar is just deeply baked into our cultural consciousness.
Mhm.
It represents this raw creative freedom.
Right. Or maybe you played a little bit in high school, life got in the way, and you're suddenly feeling that itch to pick it back up.
Exactly.
So you get this urge, you open up your laptop, and you start searching for an instrument. But immediately you just hit a wall of information.
Yeah, a massive range of prices.
Exactly. Prices and, well, a whole lot of really confusing terminology. And that is exactly the journey we're going on today for this deep
It's
dive.
a fun one.
It really is. We're looking at some brilliant insights from a builder and writer named Ang. They published this piece on December 14th, 2022, titled The Cost and Craft of Entry-Level Electric Guitars.
Also known as, so you're thinking of getting an electric guitar. Again, part two.
Right. And they basically set out to game the system of buying an entry-level electric guitar. But what's really cool is that this deep dive isn't just for musicians.
No, not at all. What is particularly compelling here is how it breaks down the hidden economics.
Yeah.
It strips away the romance of this, magical artistic tool and breaks it down into cold, hard economic components. Manufacturing, supply chains, all of that.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the journey starts with a really tempting premise. The author originally didn't want to just go buy the cheapest pre-assembled guitar off the rack.
Right, they wanted to build a partcaster.
Exactly. For those who don't know, building a partcaster means assembling the instrument piece by piece. You buy the neck from one vendor, the body from another, electronics separately, and you put it all together on your workbench.
And, it sounds incredibly appealing, especially if you're on a budget.
Well, totally.
The logical assumption is, well, if I assemble it myself, I'm cutting out the middleman, right? Saving on factory labor costs.
You figure you can get a mid-tier instrument for a bottom-tier price.
Yeah, but that is exactly the trap.
Wait, really? So it doesn't actually save money?
Not at all.
Mm.
When you actually run the numbers, building a partcaster ends up costing significantly more in the long run than just buying a pre-built guitar of the same quality.
Huh. Is this like trying to build a car by buying all the parts separately from the dealership?
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, yeah.
Because it sounds like a fun weekend project, but financially it's a trap. You buy the steering wheel on Tuesday, the engine block on Friday. By the time you buy the 4 tires, you've spent the cost of a whole sedan.
Exactly. What we're crashing into here is the immense power of economies of scale.
Right.
When a major manufacturer builds an entry-level instrument, they aren't ordering one tuning peg at a time. They're buying tens of thousands of them.
Massive industrial barrels of parts.
Right. Whole shipping containers of raw wood. They have automated assembly lines. So buying individual parts just strips away that volume discount.
But wait, if economies of scale make pre-built instruments so much cheaper, isn't there a reason someone might still do this?
Right.
Why is the market for standalone parts so huge?
Well, getting individual parts really only makes sense if the actual act of building the guitar is your intended goal.
Oh, like if it's your hobby.
Exactly. If your hobby is woodworking and soldering, then the premium you pay is just the price of admission for your hobby. You're paying for the experience.
Got it. But if your goal is just to learn how to play music, the DIY route is a terrible strategy.
Completely inefficient.
Okay, so building from scratch is off the table for the standard beginner. That leaves you with buying a cheap, mass-produced guitar.
Right.
But if factories are making these so cheaply, what corners are they cutting? And should you even care?
To answer that, we have to look at the anatomy of the guitar itself. And the best place to start is the electronics.
The parts that make the guitar actually electric.
Exactly. Now, in a budget guitar, those electronics are going to be the absolute lowest quality the factory can source.
So really bottom of the barrel stuff.
Yeah. But there's a massive silver lining here. The author points out that an electric guitar is a highly modular platform.
Oh, meaning the parts are easy to swap out.
Right. These cheap parts are incredibly easy to upgrade later. Take the pickups, for example.
Those are the magnets under the strings, right?
Yeah, the source has this beautifully simple definition. Pickups are literally just a bunch of wires wrapped around a magnet.
That's it.
That's it. It's incredibly primitive technology dating back to the 1930s. Because there are no moving parts, a pickup, regardless of how cheap it is, will basically last forever.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. If pickups are literally just magnets and wire that last forever, Why do people obsess over them so much? Are the cheap ones really that bad, or are they essentially just temporary placeholders?
They're absolutely just temporary placeholders. I mean, they get the job done for a beginner, which is making the guitar loud.
Right.
And the same logic applies to the potentiometers or pots.
The little knobs for volume and tone?
Exactly. They're just electrical resistors. A cheap one might feel a little scratchy when you turn it, but the underlying mechanism functions. And replacement pots cost a few dollars and take 5 minutes to solder.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the electronics are essentially plug and play. You aren't locked into the manufacturer's cheap choices.
Precisely. The hardware, like the tuners and the bridge, operates on the same principle. You can just upgrade them with a screwdriver.
Okay, so the electronics are just modular add-ons. But that means the true test of a cheap guitar's value isn't in the wires. It has to be in the foundation that you can't easily swap out.
Exactly. The wood.
The bones of the beast. So the source explains that to save money, manufacturers use heavier or less resonant wood for cheaper guitars.
Right. And it's not just the type of wood, it's how it's built.
Yeah, because an expensive guitar body is cut from one large solid wood block. But a cheap, entry-level body is built from several smaller pieces of wood that are joined and glued together.
It's essentially the woodworking equivalent of sweeping up the shop floor and gluing the scraps together.
It totally reminds me of buying furniture, like buying a flat-pack desk made of particle board versus a solid oak dining table.
That's a great comparison.
But here is the surprising aha moment from the source. The author says the glued together body doesn't even really matter.
Right. It's largely irrelevant.
Like, as long as it holds all the parts together, it's fine. So is the body really just a glorified wooden bracket?
Yes, exactly. You have to contrast the passive role of the electric guitar's body with an acoustic guitar.
Oh, because an acoustic needs to vibrate to make sound.
Right. On an acoustic, the hollow body is the amplifier. But on a solid body electric, the electronic amplifier does the heavy lifting. The chunk of wood is just a rigid chassis.
So high-end players might argue about the subtle tones of single-piece swamp ash. But for a beginner, glued-together basswood is perfectly fine.
It serves its structural purpose perfectly well. The hidden seams under the paint are not something you need to stress over.
Okay, so if the body is just a passive piece of wood holding the electronics, where does cheap manufacturing actually become a liability?
Well, that brings us to the single most critical component, the neck.
The danger zone.
The danger zone, exactly. This is where the cost-cutting goes from being a minor tonal debate to a major biological problem.
Because the neck is where the human actually interacts with the instrument. It's the biological interface.
Think about the biomechanics. You are constantly pressing down on steel strings, sliding your hand, bending strings. If the factory uses unstable wood or poor manufacturing here, it is literally painful to play.
And the specific hardware failure usually comes down to the truss rod, right? The source says a crappy neck might even have a missing or terrible truss rod.
Yes, and to understand why that matters, you have to look at the tension. Steel strings exert over 100 pounds of continuous pull, trying to fold the guitar in half.
Like bowing it forward into a banana shape.
Exactly. So manufacturers insert a threaded steel rod, the truss rod, down the center of the wooden neck to counteract that forward pull.
It's a delicate tug of war between the strings and the steel rod.
Right. And if a factory installs a cheap, brittle truss rod, or skips it entirely, the wood loses that tug of war. The neck bows forward.
Which means the strings are lifted super high off the fretboard, what they call high action.
High action, yes. And if the strings are hovering way off the wood, you have to squeeze them down much harder just to make a single note.
Ouch!
It physically shreds your calluses and strains your tendons. And to make matters worse, cheap necks also suffer from terrible fretwork.
Oh, the frets. Those are the thin metal dividers along the neck, right?
Yeah, and if the factory doesn't file and polish the edges, they stick out over the wood.
Like sliding your hand up and down a cheese grater.
It is a genuinely painful experience. Now, some issues can be fixed with a proper setup by a professional luthier or even yourself.
Right.
But a fundamentally bad neck or a missing truss rod, that makes playing miserable. No amount of adjusting will save a warped, cheap piece of wood.
So what does this all mean for the listener who is just starting out? Is it highly likely that thousands of people give up on learning guitar not because they lack talent, but because their cheap guitar's neck is literally fighting their hands?
It is incredibly common. They aren't failing at music, they're just losing a physical fight against broken machinery.
That is tragic.
Mm.
Because a bad neck can physically ruin the learning experience, we have to look at how to avoid this. Which brings us to the author's final, crucial piece of practical advice for your buying strategy.
The tactile test.
Yes, Aang says if you are getting a cheap guitar, you must physically try it yourself at the store.
You have to. These affordable ranges have plenty of quality control issues.
But wait, we live in an era where we just click a button online and wait for a box to arrive. Aang is telling us we have to go back to brick-and-mortar stores. Isn't there any exception?
Well, the source does point out one exception. Buying sight unseen is really only acceptable if you live in a country with good warranty and return policies.
Ah, so if you have an ironclad, no questions asked return policy.
Exactly. If you can test it in your living room and ship it back for free if the neck is warped, then take the gamble. Otherwise, physical interaction is mandatory.
Because we are dealing with organic materials, wood reacts to humidity, temperature changes in shipping containers. No two pieces are identical.
Right. You can't quantify how a neck feels by looking at a high-res web photo. This highlights the broader value of tactile evaluation in a highly digital, mass-produced world. Your hands have to verify what your eyes are seeing.
You literally have to slide your palm up the neck to feel if those frets are sharp.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's quickly recap this incredible journey.
Let's do it.
We realized partcasters aren't actually cheaper because you lose the volume discount. We learned you shouldn't fear cheap modular electronics like pots and pickups because they basically last forever and are super easy to upgrade.
Right.
We found out we can totally forgive glued together bodies since they're just a structural bracket. But we have to fiercely guard against painful, low-quality necks by physically testing guitars in person.
It's all about avoiding that pain point.
Exactly. And this knowledge just makes you an empowered, informed consumer. You are perfectly equipped to dig through the budget racks and find a great hidden gem of an instrument.
You know, this whole discussion centers around the inconsistencies and cost-cutting of organic materials like wood.
Yeah.
But looking forward, I want to leave everyone with this thought. If wood is the main bottleneck for quality and pain-free playability, what happens when entry-level guitars transition entirely to 3D printed materials or carbon fiber?
Oh, wow.
Will the concept of a bad neck or a warped fretboard completely disappear? It could turn wood into a purely nostalgic luxury?
A perfectly straight, mechanically flawless neck straight out of a printer. That changes the entire landscape of learning music.
It really does.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden economics of electric guitars. Keep learning, keep analyzing the world around you, and maybe even start shredding on your next guitar. We'll catch you next time.